Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Pastor Ben here, along with Jordan, and we're doing a unique special episode here. We wanted to take a few minutes, to talk about politics, especially from like the Christian perspective. And there were several reasons we wanted to do this. One, because of a lot of the conversations out there, a lot of people experiencing anxiety, a lot of people stressed, a lot of people wondering, like how are we even supposed to navigate a time like this, especially since as of now, which is, November 5th in the late evening, the election hasn't been called, probably won't be called for a while. But like, how do we talk about this? But even not just the election, but over the last couple of years, Jordan and I have felt, we just need to be able to talk more openly about this stuff. Um, and because it is important to talk about politics and being able to talk about it. And in an atmosphere that seems to be cultivated where people feel unable to do that, we wanted to take some time and just have a conversation back and forth. We do have some points written out, things that we did want to talk about, but we're really doing this as a conversation between Jordan and myself, which we felt was probably the best way to do this because it might be a surprise to you. I don't know. But Jordan and I, when it comes to politics, we actually disagree on several points. We come from, different perspectives, but we're still able to, be friends. It doesn't get in the way of our friendship. We can share, our honest thoughts and feelings about things. And then, at the end of the day, be like, hey, hope you're doing well. And we'll talk again later. And so we kind of want to demonstrate what that looks like and how you can have a conversation like that, but also along with that, being able to talk about this, as important as it is, like it is very difficult because in order to have an honest conversation about politics, you really have to sort of come off your moral high horse, which can be very difficult,
Oh
especially
man.
since for a lot of people, like, we're very emotionally invested in our political view, and so it can be very difficult to kind of see beyond that and also be able to see other people beyond, their political perspectives. So this episode, we're really going to be examining, how as Christians do we respond to what's happening this political season, or even generally just politics in general. Like, for one, the internally, what can we learn about our own ideas and beliefs? What things should we be reflecting on now? But also externally, right? Like, how do we respond to this? Like, how do we treat people? How should this reframe how we live? So, with that being said, I don't know. Is there anything else we want to say before we move on, or you think maybe that's a good
I,
introduction?
I have a couple disclaimers. I
Okay,
think
go
we should
for it.
do some disclaimers. We're not telling you who to vote for in this podcast. And
Right.
we're not going to approach the big mainline issues and tell you it is more Christian or less Christian to vote one way or the other on abortion, on, the Green New Deal, public transit, blah, 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 all the stuff, all the things.
Yeah.
That's not what we're doing. What we're talking about is the two, we'll call them worlds, but let's just talk about our internal and external reality real quick, and let's just talk about what politics is. Let's get into the mechanics of it, because I think if we understand how it works for ourselves, we can understand what we're really talking about, and you'll understand why we're doing the podcast. So first and foremost, politics is like broad ethics. In a democracy, right? Our political rules and our laws, right, are set and established by a party passing legislation that reflects the majority's ethics, right? That
Hmm.
makes sense. So, like,
Yeah.
basically, like, if you think the government should be small, that it is a morally right thing to do to allow people the freedom to make based on what they can earn in the market, versus you think that it's morally just or unjust, to allow absolute freedom and to allow for the possibility of, like, highly wealthy people controlling certain things, like, that will dictate your position on the economy, right? And your position on, like, legislating, like, limitations in capitalism in particular.
Hmm.
I don't really want to get into every issue piecemeal like that. That's going to be way too much time. But the idea is that it's a reflection at a very practical level of our belief system. So if we're not aware of what our internal thoughts are and how we treat others when we express those internal thoughts, we're going to really, I think, one, you're going to hurt the democracy in the United States anyway, because it functions on us being able to dialogue. So on a
Yeah.
practical level, please practice that and do it nicely. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. Please practice that and do it
Mhm.
nicely, because we are not going to function without you.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think the other important issue is that when it comes to personal relationships, I read an article from Reuters, which is a pretty good source, uh, that there are a lot of people that have had such deep political divides during this last 4 years. This is not me blaming a candidate. I'm just telling you that we've been more politically charged as a nation for a variety of different reasons,
Mhm.
that they are like disowning family members, and they're not unsure if they're ever going to speak again. Now, that these are some of the extreme cases, but the idea is that these are thoughts that are our values and they come really deep to us. And if you're unwilling, there's a difference between compromising on your values and being able to dialogue and express your values in a respectful way. And,
Yeah.
and we're saying that you need to do the latter. Um, Talking to somebody who doesn't agree with the value doesn't inherently make them, depending on, I guess I should say this, depending on what position they're advocating for, right? If they're like, no, I think I should kill everybody and like I should be the ruler, like maybe that's not okay. But like,
Yeah. Might be a
like,
little too extreme. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But like there's a level of healthy tolerance. And I don't think that we need to parse out to the T exactly what that means. I think that most people can pick that up on their own. But I think when we get stuck in our own mental like sound chambers and our own internal dialogue, we lose a little bit of clarity on what that is. So like that's really all I'm
Mhm.
trying to say, if that makes sense. So my disclaimer is that we're not telling you how to do things. We're not
Mhm.
offering some centrist wisdom point. We're not saying, be a libertarian. We're not doing stuff like that. Well, all we're doing is talking about how we function as Christians in a democratic society, one specifically like the United States, where things at this current time, as of right now, we don't even know who our president is, things are really charged, really,
Yeah.
really charged. I think
Oh,
that's
yeah.
fair, Ben. Is that a fair disclaimer?
Yeah, I think it is. Although I would say, I think Republicans would say, well, it's not a pure democracy; it's a constitutional republic with.
Fair enough. See, already. But see how Ben said that in a nice, polite way. That's what we're talking about. That's an example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and
With
it
a
yeah
big goofy grin on his face that I'm trying not to laugh with.
yeah no, you're
I
good.
can't.
No, like I think that no, that's a good disclaimer. Because a lot of people right now are putting out
That was actually really
material,
funny.
which is fine. If that's their prerogative. They're sort of feeding off of the atmosphere and building off of a lot of the anxiety that's out there. And we're actually trying the opposite approach, which is no, let's actually settle down a little bit and let's just sort of cut to the heart of it. Let's put the politics while talking about them. Let's put the more charged things aside and just really get to the heart of how do you do this,
Yeah, exactly.
basically. Yeah.
And what, and even to some extent, we might touch on. I don't know how deep we'll get into it. Even what platforms are appropriate to do this
Yeah.
too, because social media has changed a lot of how we do this.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
so I think, Ben, the best place for us to start then is to kind of frame really the big question of how active should a Christian be anyway? Do you think that's a
Hmm.
good place to get us started tonight?
No, I think it's a horrible place to start. I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's a good place. Uh,
It's going to be a long night for me, guys. Pray for me already. Uh, uh, no, that's good. So let's talk about the framing real quick. So like any kind of we want to I think it helps to think of it on a spectrum of involvement.
mhm,
So on one side, you're extremely, extremely, extremely. This is the most important thing, the onlyest thing, as Chancellor Rapper says.
yeah.
On the other side, you have people that just it doesn't matter. It's not important.
Mhm,
And I think that we have to figure out where we land, because I don't think it's always clear cut whether it should be one or the other. And I am also not always of the persuasion that the middle is always the best. Um, there's a saying I heard in my history class: compromise made the union, compromise kept the union, but compromise also broke the union.
hmm.
And that was like how the Civil War started. And I say that because like sometimes we have to figure out how to move past stuff, and you got to be okay taking a side on things. But all I'm
Mhm.
simply saying is that if you can understand it on a frame, you can figure out where you might be leaning right now, where you might want to ultimately get to, and how you handle others that lean in a different place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Sorry, I'm just writing down that quote because I love that quote.
Yeah, Mrs. Johnson, my tenth grade AP US history teacher. I took AP US history. I don't know. You're all wondering how did I get in? I'm still wondering the same question. My my 10th grade AP US history teacher said that to us, and I thought it was like the most memorable thing I'd ever heard.
Hmm.
So
That's a
let's
really good point.
thanks, man. So let's talk about the far extreme of lack of basically total political passivity.
Mhm.
Uh, I have to be careful on this one because this is very much not me. I'll just tip my hand right now because I think if I don't tell you, then I'm just going to frame it in a bad way. I feel like political passivity for Christians stems from something we call a lifeboat theology. A lifeboat theology is the idea that God, and we've talked about this in our previous podcasts, particularly the Apostles' Creed. A lifeboat theology is a theology that has a soteriology, right? A way or belief of salvation, right? That God will ultimately suck us all up into heaven and wipe everything clean. So really, this is a almost like a precursor, like a pregame, I guess. I don't even know what the term would be to
Mhm.
when God ultimately comes back and does his like real thing. And so I think what happens a lot of times is that Christians who buy into that model, and this is a really, really popular Christian belief model, and Ben and I have actually pushed back against it, is it forces you to realize that nothing matters. Now, hear
Mhm.
me out, because if God's going to take the chessboard that he's been playing on anyway, and he's going to just basically like slam it to the side and say, just kidding, I'm going to turn the board upside down. We're going to play a new game now. Who knows what that's going to look like? And that's not mean to God. I'm not trying to I'm just saying, like, if you believe that, though,
Yeah.
then the reality is, what does it matter if your knight goes to E9 or E10 or whatever move he can make? It doesn't. It doesn't. The answer is it doesn't. Right. And so
Mhm.
my idea is that this lifeboat theology is that becoming a Christian, you get on that lifeboat. Once you get on that lifeboat, you're basically set and secure and you're ready to go on to that next, plane of existence. And this doesn't matter. I think that this is unhealthy for a variety of different reasons. One, I think it's very, very much not what the Bible teaches. Ben, can you say if I'm crazy on that or not?
Nope, you're not crazy. That's pretty accurate. That is not what the Bible teaches. It doesn't teach a lifeboat theology because lifeboat theology, like you said, so there's sort of a joke among some Nazarene pastors because I'm a Nazarene pastor that we are
Don't say.
we're saved, we're sanctified, and then we're petrified, which is that like once we're saved, the Holy Spirit will just like finish what He needs to do in us, and then we'll just like be in this static spiritual state like until Christ comes back, uh, which is, I mean, we joke about it because it's a horrible view, but that is also a fairly popular view. A lot of people hold that, but it's not consistent with Scripture. Scripture always talks about, the need to continually be transformed, which involves, how we interact with the world around us. It is not just, like that song on the Jericho Road. I hate that song. I know a lot of people love it. It's awful. The lyrics to the song, the Jericho Road, and you can look it up, the chorus goes, on the Jericho Road, there's room for just two. On the Jericho Road, it's Jesus and you. It's horrible because the idea behind that is it's all about just my relationship with God and nothing else matters. It's like that is not consistent at all with what Scripture teaches, and I don't even know. Like, I don't want to start a whole conversation on this, but one of the verses that has come up in some major political positions, such as Black Lives Matter, or I can't think of another one, but that's a really popular one, are the verses in the Old Testament where God is saying, like, you need to, enact justice, you need to practice justice, for the oppressed, and which I know some Christians might not like it. Obviously, there's different ways to interpret that, but that is a political uh, working out of our beliefs that God is calling us to. Like, no, be involved in these things.
Yeah.
So lifeboat theology is not consistent with that.
Yeah, I agree. And even more to the point, it just kind of goes directly against some of what Jesus says. And it also goes against the idea of the resurrection, which we've talked about ad nauseum on our previous podcast. I know I already made the shameless plug. I won't make it again. But if you really, really lost and this is your first pod, finish up with us, but go back and check those one out, particularly about the resurrection.
Yeah.
Has a lot of implications on our belief system. But I think you said it so well, Ben. Like, the biblical text teaches something a little bit more than just like get them saved, get them out of here.
Mhm.
I hate it when people talk about the Bible as the acronym basic instructions before leaving Earth. Like, it's just such and I'm just gonna name one other thing that annoys me because I'm just gonna be an old man yelling at clouds for a second. That Simpsons meme. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it, the song I'll Fly Away, which low
Mhm.
key is a Southern gospel banger, but it's also like just terrible theology. Like, I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. Hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Like, okay, great. So you're out of here? Like, what the heck, dude? Like, the problem with that is that it refuses to acknowledge what Ben said, the biblical text, but it also refuses to acknowledge the human element.
Mhm.
which is what we're talking about, is acknowledging that people, are hurting now,
Yeah.
you know, and it stems from a place, I think, an overemphasis on your individualism rather than seeing things as God sees it. And I think that there's a balance between seeing your own salvation worked out, but also seeing how you can enact God's plan and His will and bring about His kingdom in the world. I'm not going to use the term social justice right now because I'm just fearful of kind of the nature of it.
Mhm.
It's been I just feel like it's been such a hard term, especially with like this week being what it is.
Yeah.
I'm simply just going to say bringing about His kingdom, and some of that does involve interactions and movements of social justice.
Mhm.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. And when you say social justice there, you don't mean it in the connotation of how like all the political baggage that term means. You just mean like sort of on the surface just what it means like justice that relates to society.
I
Social justice. I'm
I
assuming.
yeah, at a broad level, yes. What I'm saying is, I did actually mean the pejorative term. What I meant though was like,
Okay.
it is a possibility that depending on the position that that term takes and like where they're leaning on something, that you would be biblically justified in supporting said cause or doing said ministry that involved in
Mhm.
that because it builds the kingdom. But ultimately, it's moving toward the kingdom and where those items intersect that you jump in. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Does that make more sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, that does. That
Okay, yeah.
does.
Sorry.
Yep.
Um, anyway, so the first thing is the far extreme of lifeboat theology. Ben,
Mhm.
did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, not to lifeboat theology. Um, no.
Okay, there's not a lot to say, so let's
Mhm.
move to the other extreme real quick. Let's talk about the politics as an idol.
Mm.
I'm on TikTok a lot. I'm on TikTok an unhealthy amount. In fact, I've actually deleted TikTok twice. Uh,
Is that the thing that you fast during Lent? You fast
uh,
TikTok?
no, I just realize that it's one. So okay, so the dancing trends are fun. I'm not gonna lie to you, and like
Mhm.
sometimes like the songs they put to it are like really catchy. So I low key, it's like the way I listen to the top 40 now is by getting on TikTok. I know that seems so stupid, but it's fun. But it's a thing, and like I follow some comedy pages. Like Caleb Francis makes me laugh so hard. He's got a great bit about Dr. Pepper. Um, if you haven't seen it, you can probably YouTube it. It's really funny. Ben, if you have TikTok, I can send it to you. I've saved it and sent it so many times. I can. It's
Okay,
just so
yeah, you'll have to
funny.
send it to me. I was about to look it up, but I'll just wait for you to send it to me.
Yeah. But anyway, like I had to get off of it because TikTok has like different places that you kind of go to, like this
Hmm.
is like straight TikTok, this is white TikTok, this is black TikTok, this is, gay TikTok, this is leftist TikTok, this is Trump TikTok, all the things.
Hmm.
So with all that said, I think that there's a TikTok trend right now that I saw of both right and left. um, the leftists are making fun of Trump supporters because they call them Colt 45, CULT 45 instead of like Colt 45,
Uh,
the drink.
hmm.
And the idea is that they're in a cult because they'll play some of the interviews where like Trump supporters say like really backwards stuff, like just like make they do the Ben and I have this recurring joke. We call it intellectual gymnastics, right? All these kind of flips and tumbles to get to a point that you're like, hey, that doesn't follow from the premise.
Yeah.
One of them that they show a lot on there is like a Trump supporter, and don't worry, I'll go after the leftists in a second here. So I'll make sure. I just for our listeners because I want to make sure that
Oh,
they
sure.
realize that I'm not just going after one, but
Yeah.
they play. I think it's a funny bit, so I just want to talk about it because I think it's really humorous. So they do this interview with this lady, and she's like, this is like 2017, and they're like, and she's at some kind of rally or whatever, and she's talking about Trump, and she's like, he's gonna arrest Obama because Obama's not legal, and he's like, okay, what would it take for you to believe Obama? She's like, I don't think I could. He's like, okay. So he goes, well, on the other side, Trump's families are immigrants. Do you believe he's okay? He's like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, okay, what would it take for you though to like if you so you weren't there? She's like, yeah, of course I wasn't there. He's like, so what would you take to believe? He's like, oh, his birth certificate, Trump's birth certificate. And he goes, okay. He's like, well, we have it, and it was signed by his mom. She's like, that's great. He's like, but we also have Obama's that's signed by his mom. She's like, well, Obama's doesn't make sense. And she's like, what do you mean? She's like, his mom has reason to lie. And it's just like, you just like the interviewer just is looking at her like, how did you add two and two together and get five? You know what I mean? Like, how did that happen? And it's a
Yeah.
funny bit. And the joke from like the leftists is like, hey, like blind loyalty to this guy is really, really stupid. Trust me, like it's not a good thing. And the other
Mhm.
side is that I think a lot of the more conservatives are accusing the leftists of something of like, I'm trying to figure out the words here. The cult like desire to change the way we communicate and what words we can and can't use, the political
Mm.
correctness battle.
Yeah.
Now, it's tough. The political correctness battle is tough because some words do carry derogatory meaning. Some stuff seems kind of confusing, you
Mm.
know? Um, and we want to, like whether and I'm not talking about whether you agree or disagree with like a person's preferred pronoun. I'm simply saying the fact that like people are like, hey, you can't even use he, her anymore. You have to say they. It becomes confusing because you're really restructuring your brain to change how you communicate. Whether
Mhm.
it's right or wrong is irrelevant. It's really difficult, and maybe that's a little unhealthy. Maybe
Mhm.
maybe it's okay, like if that's not your preferred pronoun, to be called that once, be like, oh, actually, I don't identify this way. Could you please call me that way? And then it's up to that person to see if they will respect your position to do that, yes or no, right? Like that becomes a dialogue and open discussion. But the idea is that if you come down hard on something like that for like a leftist, like maybe you're in a different kind of cult, you're in a different kind of thought cult, right? I know a lot of Republicans think that if you go to college, you become some kind of liberal socialist, and that's not an insult, it's just kind of a thing. And the idea is that for both of these groups, they're so entwined in their political position and they've so used it to like shape their worldview that they almost can't see past it. And
Yeah.
it's not a blindfold, but it's an intellectual prison of their own internal dialogue, so total and so complete that they can't move outside of it. And they
Mhm.
can't hope for anything outside of it. And I think that as a Christian is extremely unhealthy because
Yeah.
your hope is not internal, it is external.
Mhm.
Sorry, that is my soapbox.
No, I think it's a good soapbox to have, especially now. Like you're right. Like they make it so much a part of their identity that yeah, like it's just totally wrapped up in it, which is really unhealthy. I mean, for a few reasons. It, this is just how my weird mind works. But the
It
first thing
shapes your
I think
social
of,
interactions, right? Like leftists are saying they don't even want to talk to Trump supporters because their values are different. Like families are leaving each other. That's crazy.
oh yeah, it's horrible, especially like the friendships that are broken because of it.
Yeah, it's hard.
Like I remember Jordan when you and I first talked um about politics, like part of me honestly was a little nervous because I was like, man, I don't want to jeopardize my friendship with this guy. But I also like I didn't feel like I had anyone else to talk to, about this, outside of my own home. Just, someone else, just to be able to share like my thoughts and stuff. Like there was some, anxiety there a little bit. Thankfully, that anxiety was proven wrong. But I know like unfortunately in a lot of conversations, a lot of people either feel like their friendships have been jeopardized or they're too afraid to jeopardize their relationships that they just don't feel comfortable talking about it at all because for a lot of people their politics have become such a major part of who they are that they define, it's sort of this weird kind of victim mentality where if I'm the victim that means that I'm in the right and so everyone else is wrong, and so anytime someone disagrees with me that's like a form of oppression and I have to fight against that,
Yeah,
because if I change my views, then that's just me being oppressed, which it happens on. I've heard it from both
you're
sides.
so
I
spot on.
totally, yeah,
You
it's
know,
definitely there.
yeah,
Yeah,
well said. Actually, that was really well said. So
thanks.
before we get accused of something that's not true, we're not arguing for you to take the middle ground where you're like, well, don't get too involved, but don't get, uninvolved,
Mhm.
because I think there are different points along that way, right? Sometimes you should be a little bit more involved. Sometimes it's okay. If you tend to lean in the direction of like, hey, this isn't important, I think that's wrong. I have friends that vote, but they put up these memes, and man, I'll be honest with you, this really bothered me. And I'll explain why in a minute here. And this is less of the lifeboat. It's a step in closer to the more extreme, right? But closer to the middle. And I think this is maybe not a great place to be sometimes. They said, no matter what happens with my candidate tomorrow, I'm going to get up, go to work, kiss my family, love others. You know what I mean? And it's like,
Mhm.
that's great. And I think when you do that, you have to recognize that there's a possibility. Now, Ben, I need you to check me here if I get out of hand. And I mean
Okay.
that sincerely.
Okay.
That there's a level of, in this particular election, right now. We're not talking how to vote. We're just talking about the situation of socioeconomic. I want to use the term privilege, but let's just say you don't have the same fears, if you can say something like that, than someone who's maybe a truck driver or a restaurant worker right now.
Mm.
Now, typically, those two people vote for different candidates, if you've been following the news at all right now. One is concerned because now we can't travel, so their livelihood is gone. So their rural home is, they can't afford it. Things are tough, and they trust that one candidate will just push things forward, and it's okay, whatever happens, and we'll make sure we get through this, and I'll be able to work again. The other one is concerned for the same thing, right? The virus is going on. I don't feel like safe passing it. When I go into work, I don't trust others to keep me safe, and I want us to really lock down, get this under control, so we can open and everything can go back to normal, and I can keep serving tables again. Now you can tell which one in my stereotype and votes for who, but the idea is that those people really have a vested interest because socioeconomically, they really like, it matters to them who wins this
Mm.
election, and it matters more than like a lifeboat, or it matters more than you, who made your job may not be affected by it. And that's an okay you should be so grateful that that's you, but I don't think that you should be putting that stuff out there because you don't know who those people are.
Mm.
And I think that you might diminish some of their anxiety. I think what would be a healthier response, and again, Ben, like I said, check me at any point in time, like what would be a healthier response is to not say that publicly on social media. Maybe say in private, like, hey, I'm really grateful that to whoever wins tomorrow, I can still go into work, and then I have my family, and like that's taking account of what's important. But I think when you use it in such a way that says we shouldn't worry, or I don't have worries, what you do is you highlight the fact that you're part of the haves for people in a situation who may be a have not.
Mm.
Does that make sense, Ben? And I think when you do that, you actually make dialogue, regardless of whether you voted for the same person or not, harder,
Mm.
you know? Because that's one point where they don't feel like they're heard, or that you're diminishing their major concern. Like this election may have them on pins and needles because they may have a strong opinion on how they should handle it, so they can go back to work, so they can feed their kids too.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good perspective to have. Because part of it sounds like what you're pretty much saying is, lifeboat theology is dangerous on the one hand because it's just an ignorant position to hold, but it also can lead to like, you know, uh, m- how do I put this? Because it does affect how our relationships with others are handled because we might diminish the things that they're experiencing because we just don't want to face it, or we feel like, well, it doesn't matter what they go through because none of it matters, and so we just sort of
Yeah.
dismiss their concerns, which might be very legitimate.
Yeah.
And a lot of
Well,
people this election do have very serious concerns, and we've heard that from a lot of people on both sides. um,
exactly.
so yeah,
Yeah,
we
I'm
have to
saying
be
this position
sensitive to
is
that.
one step in. Yeah, I thank you for saying that better. I'm saying this is one step in than Lifeboat, because Lifeboat is like, hey, it's all going to get reset in the end anyway. So like, what's
Mm.
it matter? This this type of person, doesn't care about anything, and they may have a strong opinion about like abortion, or maybe like not doing fossil fuels, or or doing
Mm.
fossil fuels rather than Green New Deal or whatever, because like their big thing is like, it doesn't matter, but we should care about lives because one soul to save is important. And so like typically the person's lifeboat theology tends to lean one way.
Mm.
um I don't mean that to be insulting. I just don't think that's a healthy place to be. I think we all kind of look at places like the Westboro Baptist Church and say
Mm.
that's a little bit, that makes me uneasy. Do you think I can
Yeah.
say that, Ben? Is that a fair point to say?
I don't know of anyone that would argue with that Westboro Baptist makes people uneasy, but also like the fact that Lifeboat Theology tends to vote one way. I don't think that's unfair. Like any position is going to tend to vote one way or the other. I can't think of anything that's like an even split between political parties. Like, oh, you
Yeah.
have just as many of these people voting Republican as they vote, Democrat. So
Yeah.
I don't think that's unfair.
Yeah.
Because you
I'm
have
just saying
people
that this.
who,
Uh-huh.
yeah, sorry, I was
No,
going to
no,
use an
you.
example. Like people who care for the environment tend to vote more on the Democrat side, but that's not to say that no people who care for the environment vote on, the Republican side. Uh,
Exactly.
Lifeboat theology is the same way. It tends to lean more one way than the other.
Yeah.
It, I, yeah, I feel like it's a really minor point, but I guess just to validate what you're saying.
Well, I appreciate
Yeah.
it. So I'm just saying that this possession one step is only one step in from that lifeboat thought, because it's still highly individualized. It's just now, yeah, you're just not, things matter, but it's only what matters to you.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to go one step further, and we're getting closer to the middle, maybe even a little past the middle. I think that's our sweet spot, between like this spot here and like somewhere around the like this matters and where I should. So like if we're having a spectrum, if you can see my hands, like we have the lifeboat, the idle, step in on the lifeboat is that one I just like, the socioeconomic privilege, like it only matters to me. What matters is what matters to me, I guess is what I'll call it. I
Yeah.
think it's this zone.
Yeah.
That's the sweet spot.
So let me throw out an illustration. Correct me if this seems wrong, and I'm not trying to say this to be charged. Okay, we already did the disclaimer. I'm going to stop saying that. Okay, so when Black Lives Matter really started to become a larger, more prominent center view movement this year, um, it was interesting to see how different churches responded and how people responded to how churches responded. So you had some churches who like went full bore, like they structured their services around the subject. Like they had, their bulletins were all about it. They were putting out videos, they were having conversations. Like that was the topic of the day. And a lot of people were like really turned off by that. And we're like, okay, like this is too much. Like it's not that we don't care, but it's a little too much. But then you had churches who like were totally were not saying anything about it. They were not referencing it at all, and you had a lot of people turned off by that too, because you had people who were like, well, I mean, we want to have some perspective on this because it's a major topic, and we, want to have some feedback in terms of, as Christians, how do we respond to this? And so those were two, I think, fairly prominent examples during that movement that highlighted kind of what we're talking about here, where on the one hand, the church is totally disengaged from it, and people were, it was causing frustration there, and it was, somewhat harmful. But then you had some churches who were too much involved in it, where it was like it was almost not like church anymore. It was just like an extension of a political position, if that's a fair assessment. But what we saw from that, looking back, and something that a lot of churches are trying to adjust to, which I think is fair, is they're recognizing, what, it is important to talk about these things. We cannot be disengaged. But on the other hand, we cannot allow these conversations to delegate to us what we preach on and what we don't preach on. But we do need to be able to speak into these issues in ways
Yeah.
that are validating to different people's positions, even though it is a politically charged conversation. That is not in itself a justification to not talk about it. And so what I'm seeing, and even uh, some conversations I've been having, is, we should talk about this, and I think that's important. Is that a good maybe example of kind of what we're talking about here, like
Yeah.
that middle ground ish?
Yeah, and it's not like the middle, because again, I've told you I'm not one of those people that's like, hey, the middle's always great, like come here, the water's lukewarm. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm not like that, but yeah, I think in this case it is the right thing, because it can't own the totality of your life and your social circle, but it also can't be to where it doesn't matter, or even where you're unwilling to acknowledge anything past your own selfishness. So what
Mhm.
you said I thought was really good. Like we should be, as Christians, and this is hard, especially if you're a Christian liberal. I'll just call it out right off the bat. Um, and it's also hard as a Christian Republican, I think, in a different way, to not be super like one way or the other, to be radicalized, because of all the pushback you get. So really, the nuance I'm trying to say is that what you said was really good. That we're truth first people rather than position first people. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Mhm. So now that we've talked a little bit about, maybe where we should fit when it comes to politics as Christians, obviously not being, I'm going to be redundant, not being disengaged, but not making it an idol where it defines everything that we do. Um, but, we should be involved. We should be aware of what's going on. When we vote, we should consider the different issues at play. In fact, I would even say it's a bit irresponsible as Christians to not participate in, you know uh, the process of conversation, or even the process of voting while being uninformed about what's going on, because we should be considerate of what's going on in our country, in our society, how our neighbors are affected, obviously not being hyper involved or hyper aware, because I do know some people like that where it's like uh I guess I'm just reiterating the whole idol thing, where it's become their lives and they justify it by saying, well, God wants us to be involved, and so that's what I'm doing. It's like, but yeah, you can definitely take that to unhealthy levels, um,
Exactly.
where it's actually secondary, or where being a disciple of Christ is secondary to being a champion for politics that seem to resonate with Christ. Um, Maybe that's some way to put it. But anyway, so all that being said, in this season of a lot of anxiety, a lot of people are worried, like people not being able to get work done because they're constantly maybe even fearful of what's going to happen this election. But there are some actually really positive things that we want to talk about, maybe just to, be encouraging, be like, it's not the end of the world. Here's some things to consider. I don't know how we want to divvy these up, but I did want to start with something that came up during uh, a staff meeting yesterday, because I'm a pastor at a church. I'm a staff pastor at a church, and so every week we have a staff meeting, and one of our pastors spoke up and said, it is crazy how close this election is, and there's a lot of anxiety behind that. But the fact that this election is so close actually seems to be a very positive thing, because it shows that it's not like one group is being suppressed or oppressed by the other. Like it's not like one group is totally taking over. There's still fairly equal representation being involved here in the political process, and I think that's something that's very encouraging. um, you know Sorry to people who are part of the third party. I guess I'm not talking about you, but for everyone else, it definitely doesn't seem like it's a total, you know, oh well, you Republicans are just you're gonna fall by the wayside or wayside. You're totally irrelevant, or you Democrats, same thing. Um, so I thought that was actually a pretty encouraging note. With
Yeah.
something positive to take out of that perspective, which did cause me to pause and reflect on that and be like, that's actually a pretty good point.
Hmm.
I don't know your thoughts on that. Maybe you would disagree, but
So I do think it is a really fair examination, and in some ways, it's a really comforting thing, Ben. Like I was thinking about this the other day. Actually, I wasn't thinking about it the other day. I was thinking about when you said it earlier when we were prepping. I think you talk about the victim mentality. I read an article, a study that anger makes you feel justified and it's
mm,
addicting because you feel so right and you just make yourself like it's just you're just like I'm right and everybody's wrong and I'm justified in feeling this way and it clouds your judgment from any kind of rational feelings. It just immediately takes that away. And it's a really interesting thing because I think with that, like the tie is that like you feel that way because you're so charged. And you're like, man, all these people are against me. How could they think that? How could they vote for that? How could they believe that? And you just get mad and your lower lip curls and your face squints like mine is. And I didn't even do it on purpose. It just happened, when I was imitating them. And like all those things go down and then you just like assume that it's not. But the reality is that there's a lot of people that just are with you and a lot of people that are with others.
mm,
And the fact that it's not a landslide is an okay thing. Now, I mean, typically, like, the popular vote is a good indicator, but even then, it's usually like 51-49 or,
mm,
49-5, 55, 50-05,
mm,
like it's usually really close. And I think what you said was really good. I think we got to remember, like, you're backed by a lot of people, a country full of people, half of a country full of people. Well, half of the biggest countries in the world full of people, to even be more specific, right?
yeah.
And you're also opposed by that many, but not in a bad way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that does bring up a good point, I think, to consider, which is demonizing the other side is a pretty big mistake, because
There's a
of
lot of them.
how, yeah, because of how large both sides are. Because I mean, think of it this way: what's more likely, that the people who disagree with you politically are just totally evil and are the scum of the earth, or that your perception of them is wrong? Like, what's more likely there?
Yeah.
that 80 million people in the United States are totally like the worst. Like they're not even worthy of respect. We should just kick them all out, or we should kill them, or whatever. Put them all on trial, or maybe your views are a little extreme.
Yeah. Maybe you're a little blind.
Yeah.
Um, and you
So
kind
there
of
is
got caught up in your own
some.
anger, righteous
Yeah.
or
So I
not.
think. Yeah. So I think the fact that it is so evenly split is a good point to maybe reflect on ourselves. Maybe we should stop painting the other person or the other party as like just this monolith of like all the worst things we could think of,
Yeah.
because like they're people, you know.
And I got to be honest, I struggle with this a little bit because, like, you know, I get frustrated. Sometimes I wonder, how could you vote for that? Like, if you understand the issue and you've taken the time to learn it, like, I think it, I don't want to say it's clear cut, but like, it makes a lot more sense. I think, like, this is a better solution. It's the best inference, you know?
Mhm.
And I think it's tough, like, cause you just tell yourself in that inner dialogue, but that kind of brings us to like our next thing, you know, like, we have to talk about it and get it
Yeah.
out there so you can
Mhm.
have that. And the more you stay in your own echo chamber, whether it's on social media by only following liberal, Republican, you know, whatever accounts, or the more you, like, you know, don't engage with family members or friends on the other persuasion, the less likely you're going to be willing to see from their point of view. And also the more you isolate yourself in a bad way, and the less like we function as a country. You know, Ben and I talked about this in the pre-show. Like, it's really like when we talked about involvement, part of involvement is being educated on the issues or at least having a position on the issues.
Mhm.
And like, I know people are like, well, I don't want to spend so much time on it. It's hard. It's complicated. I'm busy. Like, that actually is counterproductive to democracy. Like,
Mhm.
you're actually hurting our political discourse, not because you're doing anything evil, but because
Mhm.
we can't function without you. Every single voter is an essential piece.
Yeah.
You're a cog in the machine that we need to run. And I mean that, because otherwise you create that vitriol, because someone who is involved and cares is going to see and hear you and be like, wow, that's crazy. You know, that's my problem, is that I have people that I debate with sometimes, or I get into, or they ask me questions, they don't know about the issue, and they're like, well, I disagree with you about that, and I'll present them evidence, and then they're just like, well, no, 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 no. And it's because, you know, they're hearing it for the first time, so they have to, like, not only process all this, the new arguments and information I said, but they
Mhm.
also have to realize that, like, you know, I'm not totally crazy either. And I know it's a bad example. My whole thing with it is like, if they'd have taken the time to educate themselves, our dialogue would have been more productive. Instead, it becomes like this whole, like, nebulous, like, I gotta learn what you're saying. I don't believe that you're right. I think you're getting it from biased sources. And I think that's where distrust of the media and distrust of the
Mhm.
other person comes from. And
Yeah.
even, and this is going to sound really radical, and I'm being both facetious and serious here, distrust of our own politicians.
Mhm. No, I think that's fair.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying they're perfect people. They're, I mean, but I think if you think every politician's a crook, uh, you're not helping yourself and you're not helping our democracy.
Mhm.
And I think that you should pay attention to what they like, for congressmen and Senate members, or for Congress representatives and Senate members, respectively. If you vote for them on a platform and they vote against that platform, and you don't think they're justified in the situation for voting against them on a platform, and they're in your state, you should vote them out. I think that's an okay thing. Um, that's important. Those are the people that pass bills. The president isn't the say all be all. This is a big deal. Ben, am I on a high horse here? Because remember, you talked about getting off the moral high horse. I'm trying not to be on one. I'm just
Mhm.
trying to say, like, everybody's important here. So be involved, like,
Mhm.
care. Like, it's
No, I think
important.
no, I think that's fair. I mean, yeah, like I think you're being honest in an objective position. Like, yeah, we should be aware. And this sort of goes back to, or maybe forward to, I don't know how we want to put it, like how we have conversations like on a one on one basis, or
Yeah.
with other people, because I think, yeah, social media has not helped us in this way,
Gosh, it really
because
hasn't.
it sort of taught us to frame political conversation as a set of gotcha moments. And well, what are your sources? And then, like, there's a lot of poisoning the well, a lot of stacking the deck, a lot of ad hominem. uh, we're just not we're just not good at having conversations about politics, because we um yeah, well, I think I've already said it. But really what it comes down to, well, I guess, is it okay, Jordan, if I use the example of like when we have conversations about political stuff that we disagree on?
Yeah, go
Is that
ahead.
okay? Okay, I won't get into specifics,
I
but
mean, you
like,
can. It's fine. I don't care.
okay. So like what we do when we talk is like you'll share, your views on things, and I'll listen to your views, and then like if I disagree with something, like I'll just like it's not like I'm like, oh well, let me show you this source and then all this information, you can read it, and then you can be corrected in your thinking. I'm just like, okay, like I can see how, where you're coming from, and so like, so my work, when we talk about that, is on trying to hear your perspective and where you're coming from, and sort of putting my preferences aside and letting myself, or really um, training myself to not feel personally offended just because you're saying something that I might not agree with, which sounds weird, but I feel like that's a major part of how we have a hard time talking about politics in general, is because we feel like if someone presents a position we disagree with, that's like somehow an attack on us personally. It's really bizarre, but we do
Yeah,
that a lot, I think. I don't think that's an
you're not wrong.
unfair statement. So that's what I do, and then, like, I do the same thing. Like, I'll share my views, you'll listen, and I can't there might have been a couple times we might have tried to, like, overtly change each other's position or, like, directly challenge something that we've said, but most of the time, it's just us sharing our position, and just doing that has, like, I've changed my mind on things because you've, articulated your position really well, and I've articulated my position well, and you've said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that I guess at the very least, like, I've said things that have helped you consider things differently. But that just comes from like us listening, which if you really want to have a good political conversation, just listen to what the other person says. Like, don't try to argue, don't try to change their mind. Which is actually a point that happens in the movie Inception, right? Which the the subject's mind can always trace the genesis of an idea. So, like, we always reject ideas that we feel are artificially implanted in our minds. Like, we need to be able to come to our own conclusions, and like we need to let people come to their own conclusions, and the only way to do that is not by attacking them or like getting into arguments, unless it's in a set, structured argument, sort of like an intellectual debate. It's probably the only place that could happen, but in my experience it's just been in listening. Like, I've had my mind changed, like, far more
Me
when
too.
I know that someone is actually listening to me, and then I'm actually listening to them. I don't know. Is that too
Yeah.
weird, too
No.
intangible?
Can I share a little, a slightly more detailed story? But I won't give away positions because I don't want people to.
Sure.
I mean, I'm pretty open about my position, but I think it's important that we keep that closed, just by virtue of uh,
Yeah.
Ben's
Don't want to get
occupation.
attacked on social media.
I mean, I get attacked on, so I get attacked via text message is a problem because I don't put stuff on social media. I got friends that troll me all the time. I love them to
Uh,
death, but goodness gracious, leave me alone sometimes. Um, anyway, because you could turn off social media notifications. You don't want to turn off your text notifications because if someone actually needs something, you want to be available.
yeah,
Um,
true.
so anyway, the reason the way I came to my political persuasion was actually a really interesting journey.
Hmm.
I became very good friends with a person that I hope he listens to this podcast. If you are listening, Nate, I want to say thank you. Um, and I hope you're hearing me, even though we're not 100% in alignment on every position. You really, really like helped me kind of think things through. And I just, the way you did it was wonderful. My buddy Nate is of one persuasion, and he's very strong in his persuasion. Um, at the time, I was more moderate just across the board. And I appreciated certain things that had been passed and some legislation. I'm not going to tell you even what the date was, so you can't know which legislation was, because I had benefited from it, and some of the places I've been working with because of my previous jobs had benefited from it. So we were talking about it, and I was like, "Well, you can't deny that this is good." And he just listened to me have my points, and he never ever argued with me about what it what it was that was right or wrong. He would
Hmm.
just say, well, actually, I want to, like, well, what about this? Have you considered this way? I don't think that is a good way to view it, because if you view it that way, then this and this and this is implied. And like, the hard part was restraint on my part, but the good part was that he was so graceful about
Hmm.
it and so gentle. That
Hmm.
sounds weird. You know what I mean? Gentle.
It
But
does sound
like,
weird.
yeah, but no, it's true though.
Yeah.
Like he treated my beliefs like they were precious to me because they
Hmm.
are. You know what I mean? Like when someone shares their opinion with you to some extent, it's like they're handing you an egg, right? This is their baby, the thought, like this is the product of their mind, right? This is the what their brain chicken has laid. And that sounds like a really stupid analogy, but it's true. Like it means something to them. They people like very rarely do people just like come up with stuff out of left field. And if they do, they usually don't hold it very tightly and they usually are pretty open about it. But like he treated it really like I don't want to say sacred, but like I said, gently. Like he was okay with like treating it with kid gloves and not jumping in and smashing it and telling me it wasn't about the win for him. It was about the dialogue. And yes, he was very open about like, hey, I actually really want you to change your mind. And here's why I think you should.
Hmm.
But I never felt like I was able to distrust him because what you said, Ben, like I could trace the genesis of that idea. He told me what it was. And I was like, you know what? I'm willing to jump into this conversation because I'm willing to consider it. And I trust this person on a human level to deliver it in a kind way. And I also trust him to respect my beliefs at this point, even though we disagree. And over time, he's won me over. So the last however many years we've been friends, I've slowly moved in his direction. Again, I'm not fully there. I don't think I can ever be fully there, just because we have some other personal beliefs that prevent
Hmm.
us from doing that. Mainly that I'm a Christian, he's not. That's a big one. But simply that, like, because he did that, did it in the way he did, I was able to like really grow and change.
Hmm.
Um, and what you said, Ben, when you gave me the like how we talk, like I learned a lot of that from talking with my buddy Nate, because if he hadn't done that for me, I not that I like have like regrets or not that I think I would regret ever being in a different political persuasion. It was just more like because he did that with me, I realized how valuable that was, you know.
Hmm.
So I wanted to share that story, one, because if he is listening, I want him to get that credit because he deserves to hear it because he's a great friend and a great person. But more to the point, because when we're talking about how to have political discourse, I think it's a really great illustration.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Never
I don't know what
described someone
else.
as a conversation as gentle. It's still
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. It's sort of an awkward thing. But I think it's fair, and I think that's needed. Like, uh, to be able to have conversations that are with people who are gentle. As again, as awkward as that, it feels weird just to say it. Like I'm like inwardly revolting against it. Just how it sounds. Maybe that's because I'm a guy. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Handle with
anyway,
care, like a box full of glass,
yeah, yeah, true. So
which is
yeah, I guess
just
that is
gentle and
more of
warmer.
a yeah. So that is more of a practical example of how you can engage in conversations. The really tricky part about engaging in political conversation with other people is that it has to be a two-way street.
Yeah.
If only one of you is listening and being gentle with the other, it's going to be just as much of a mess as if you're both just yelling at each other. And that's really the tricky part. And like I'm not saying make sure the other person is like this. I'm just saying it as a statement of fact. Like you can't talk to everyone about politics, and it's going to be like that. Um, some people you
And
just
it's okay if
can't
it's
talk
not.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And if that person can't be open to your ideas, don't be rude. Like you don't have to be mean about it. Like even if they're insulting to you, you can just move on, because the
Mhm.
reality is that they're on one of those extreme branches that we've talked about, probably the unhealthy one, the idol,
Yeah.
and they've imprisoned themselves so intellectually tight that they'll never be able to connect with human beings the same way you do.
Mhm.
In some ways, this is actually really like kind of similar to like evangelism.
Hmm. Yeah. No, it is. It is. Like it evokes like the same kind of emotional responses.
you know, um, that you treat it sensitively, you know. And I think people hate that term because it's like, oh, I should be open and honest and direct. And like, you can be direct, but you can
Mm.
be direct in a way that's like not a jerk. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
believe in Jesus or you're going to the HE double hockey sticks. Like, that's not an effective evangelist tool. You know that, right? So it's also not effective political strategy.
Yeah. Oh, truth.
Sorry.
Truth.
But
Yeah,
you
it
said it
sounds
in such
good.
a good way, Ben. You did. You really did.
Thanks.
But
Um,
like, can I talk about something that you had mentioned and brought up in pre-show. Can we transition to this real quick? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Not to do it awkwardly.
No, it's fine. I don't know where you're going, but okay.
No, but like the reason that we can have dialogue is because of the hope that we have.
Hmm.
You know, Ben put it this way: like we do this almost every 4 years, and
Yeah.
we're still here.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's not to say that some of our decisions don't have importance, and occasionally, and depending on how you feel about the issues now, they might even have life or death importance. So yeah,
Mhm.
care, but realize that if you're one of the fortunate ones, be grateful, be sensitive, but be okay talking.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
think that's important because your hope is somewhere else, and perhaps the Lord hasn't called you home. Well, I don't actually like that phrase. Perhaps you haven't moved on, and God hasn't done this resurrection plan, and your life hasn't ended yet for a purpose. And
Mhm.
then that's all I'm saying is that there's a teleology and a design to this world that we believe, and because we believe that, we can trust even when things don't go our way, it's going to be okay.
Mhm.
Whether you're red or blue, purple, green. What color are libertarians?
Yellow,
Yellow.
I think.
It's a weird
Well,
color.
that's how they show up in the election maps.
Yeah.
So I guess
Yeah.
yellow.
Yeah. And then I don't really know if any other major parties, if you're a Kanye supporter, you can, I don't know, stripes, like zebra stripes. That's my Kanye pick because like one of my favorite Kanye songs, he's like, actually, I can't name the quote because it's a Christian podcast, but there's a zebra stripe reference
Hmm.
with his album "Watch the Throne" with Jay-Z, which is a banger. Anyway, good stuff. But that's Kanye's thing because of that reference to that
Oh
song.
my goodness.
I just can't quote it right now because I realized who our audience is, and then I'm going downhill.
No,
Just
it's okay.
digging.
It's all right. Yeah. So yeah, like we do this every 4 years. Thinking back to the 2016 election and how crazy that was, and how
Yo,
people were saying, "Oh, if Trump is elected, that's the end. We're going to lose America. Our democracy is going to totally be eroded." They said the same thing in 2008 when Obama was elected. I remember, Republicans saying that in 2016. It was Democrats saying that about Trump. Like the emotions and the intensity is going to be here every 4 years. Obviously, when we think back to that time, it doesn't seem as extreme because we have the benefit of hindsight and realizing, oh, it actually wasn't as bad as what it might seem. Um, but we don't know the effects of this election, so that just sort of heightens everything.
yeah,
But there's another point to be made here in the fact that this happens every 4 years, is that it puts the onus on us to really focus in on being able to handle this better going
yeah,
forward, because it's not like, oh well, once this election season is over, then everything's going to be fine the rest of our lives. Like, no, this is an ongoing thing. Politics are always going to be here, and so we have to learn how to live in that world, how to navigate it, how to have these conversations, because we can't escape it. It's always going to be here every 4 years, or really every 2 years, because you have midterms.
yeah,
Like, these conversations are going to come up. Like, we just have to learn how to live with it.
yeah,
um,
and how
yeah.
to do it in a healthy way, in a
Yeah.
meaningfully healthy way. You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah. um, One other point to make too, that is specific to us as Christians, uh, is I I think this is a good thing to say. There's a lot to be said here, but it can come across as sort of politically passive. I'm not intending that, because the truth is, as Christians, we know that God calls us to be involved in the world. We are a part of God's redemptive work. That's not to say that His redemptive work begins and ends with us, but we are a part of it. So, that being said, one thing to help put things in perspective here: no matter who becomes president, no matter which side wins the House or the Senate, regardless of all of that, it's important to remember that the power that God has to change people's lives will always be more significant than the power that we have to determine who's in charge. And I think that might seem like a really cliche line, but I do feel like that's a very important thing for us as Christians to remember in this election season, which is that, like, we are participating in an important process, but like, it's not as if God's work in the world is going to be determined solely by who we vote for.
yes,
Like, it's a very dangerous position to have, and all it does is create more anxiety for us.
exactly. I don't think there's anything else that can be said on that, except for this. Well, actually, I do have one thing. If that's cliche to you and you don't like hearing that, think about what a cliche is. A cliche is something you've heard repetitively over and over and over and over again to the point where you're tired of hearing it. That doesn't make it any less true. It just means that you don't like hearing it, which is my challenge to you. If you heard that statement, you didn't care for it. I've thought this through a lot. Ben and I really put some work into this on the pre-show. Like, no matter who you believe and no matter how powerful a political regime is, even if it was like a fascist regime, like, Hitler or Stalin, right? Like that is not greater than any power that God has. And think about that. Like, really think about that and reflect on that. It is not greater than any power that God has. And that he has worked in spite of those political circumstances to create a church, right, of people that are moving toward heaven. And even
Mhm.
though it can be terrible for human rights and it can be terrible for bad things, if you're that concerned about those kind of things in our political discourse, the whole point is this: that regardless, God's still going to move and he is bigger than that anyway. And if you can't reflect on that and think about that as a Christian, I think that you've become a little jaded. And I think it's time to maybe be okay softening up. It's the parable of the soil, right? You've been trampled on a little bit too much, but it's okay. Take a little bit of water, take a little bit of tilling, and I promise you, just being willing to soften up, um, it's a good thing. You'll have those seeds of grace grow again. Sorry, that
Yeah.
was my little preachy moment.
No, that's a good point. Um, and all right, so let's assume that worst case scenario, the people that you wanted to win the election, let's say they all lose, right? I mean, we already have some of the results coming in, but let's say everyone lost, right? It's like the worst case scenario. Um, it's gonna be okay. Like, we've had situations, like I remember in 2008. A lot of my Republican friends were really upset because Obama won the presidency and Democrats won the House and the Senate, and they kind of had free reign over the policies they wanted to enact. Um, and there was some important legislation that happened, but it's not like the world ended. It's not like America ceased to be a country. The same thing happened in 2016, where my Democrat friends were upset because Trump won the presidency and Republicans had the House and the Senate. Like, it's not like these scenarios that we tend to think are like doomsday scenarios. Oh, the other side's going to win everything, and then America is just going to totally change. Like, uh, that's I don't know how to say it in a polite way. As basically, it's fear mongering, but also like, okay, so let's say that happens. Well, in 2 years we have midterms, so we'll have a chance to vote again, and in 4 years we're going to be voting one way or another. We're going to be voting for someone else to be president, possibly. So it's like, uh, yeah, there was something I was going to say about that. No, no,
Well,
no, I was just reflecting on like worst case scenario. So all that being put in perspective, like it's really not going to be as bad as what it seems for a lot of people. So if there's any comfort to be found in that, I guess that's all I'm trying to say is, it's okay to calm down. Maybe, I don't know. Am I saying that in a horrible way? I don't know if the point's coming
I
across.
think what you're trying to say is that if you can trust democracy, as hard as that can be sometimes, right?
Mm,
Whether you're skeptical of voter suppression or the way we're counting votes, right? I just call them both out right now.
mm,
Those are the big issues. If you can trust our democracy, even despite your suspicions, and you can work to educate others and yourself on the issues, and you can try to participate in the system, and even when it doesn't work in your favor and your team doesn't, you don't stay on top of the results. Like, elections are still ultimately won by people, not by land. To some extent, money, those determine advertisements, but you can encourage others, and we talked about, and have healthy dialogue
mm,
and make things better in the long term. Like, you have that power still. So I think what you're saying, Ben, is that, like, it's not the end of the world, because the beauty of democracy is that since it's built on people, as
mm,
much as it doesn't always feel like it, no matter what side you're on, it still is. You just have to be willing to embrace that and do what you can, even if it's in your own small space. And it may not feel meaningful and powerful, but that doesn't mean that it's any less impactful.
yeah.
Um, and we say that because we believe that's the same thing is true for our own Christian benefit. You don't have to be Billy Graham to be a great Christian. In fact,
Mm,
I would venture to say I know better Christians than Billy Graham that you've never heard of.
mm,
Not because Billy Graham's not a great person or a great leader, but because those people and their faith are so inspiring in such a deep, meaningful way to me and others, that I think that they've had a greater impact than someone like Billy Graham could have. Even though Billy Graham has like this numerical status and commercial value. I'm not trying to insult Billy Graham,
mm,
rest in peace. But like, I'm just trying to say that, like, impact is not as easily quantifiable as we want to make it, you know?
Mhm.
And more to the point, you know, our democracy does cycle through. So you, worst case scenario, only have to wait for 2 years before you can at least flip one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
True.
and then if you're that concerned about it, then go out and, campaign, do the stuff, that's
Yeah.
okay things too to do as a Christian. Like, it's fine to be active.
Mhm.
Like I said, just don't make it an idol. Is
Yeah.
that what you're trying to say, Ben?
Yeah. That's a good summary of what I was trying to say.
Cool.
Thanks, Jordan.
Well, I knew what you meant. It's like we prepped on this show or something.
Yeah. Um, so all that being said, I don't know. I feel like, as far as I'm concerned, and the things that I wanted to share with you all who are listening, I think I've probably said we could obviously go on forever, but I think I've summarized my main points. Was there anything else that Jordan you feel we should maybe touch on?
Yeah, I want to end with the talking and the dialogue and the importance of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, where to begin? I'll try not to diatribe. I'll just try to say it out.
Okay.
I am a political minority in my own church, and that's hard for me.
Hmm.
And I tend to find others that think like me and hang out only with them. And I am wrong for that. On the flip side, I don't think it's very good of others to do the same to me,
Hmm.
to not agree with me or to think that my opinions are motivated by something else. Those seeds of distrust hurt us as a church,
Hmm.
and they hurt us as a society. The reality of democracy and the reality of Christianity is that they're both built on the backs of people. I know that sounds crazy. Um, Christianity is a belief system that's transformative. Democracy is a political system we participate in, but either way, they both take place within people. Does that make sense, Ben? What I'm
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
or at least at the grassroots level, it boils down to people.
Hmm.
Um, and you can be a Christian Republican, you can be a Christian Democrat, you can be a Christian Libertarian, a Green Party.
Yeah. And
The
let me
only
just
thing,
emphasize that
yeah,
is possible. I know that there are people who think that that is impossible, that you can be a Christian and be a Republican or Christian and Democrat. Surface, I'm just saying right now that is possible. We can get into details later, but I just wanted to back up what you're saying, Jordan.
thank you.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, if we're not willing to talk, especially as Christians in house, we're gonna fail. Um, so for my Christian Republicans, open your doors to some people that you don't know, because you may find that they have some good things to say to you, and that their passion can help drive your church forward. Because typically those people that are passionate in that way are also typically passionate about other things, and driving the church in different ways. Maybe they have different ideas on how we can reach out to communities. That's an okay thing, right? I'm not knocking conservatives; they never have good ideas. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying that, like, maybe that they can approach an issue in a different way, and they can bring more people into church, into the kingdom, that you can't think and communicate with in an effective way at this time, because you don't know how to think like them, because you never interacted with them. So it's not an insult to you. It's just the reality of it, right?
Mhm.
On the flip side, Christian liberals, uh, you guys in particular are kind of in a weird spot. So here's my word of encouragement to you. Uh, you guys have been the minority for a while. Don't quit. Knock on doors. Open your doors. Try to show that it's not the biggest issue in the world. We're united by the King. Continue to be okay trying to change hearts and minds, but be okay not changing them. And don't quit and don't leave churches.
Mhm.
You're the ones who are guilty of that. And that's not a mean thing. It's not an accusation, but it's a reality that typically the Christian liberals get tired of feeling isolated and alone, and they leave. Part of that is because you're unwilling to communicate and live in a community that doesn't think like you, which is what you're accusing the other side of doing. But remember, we're all rooted for the same cause. That's the cause of the kingdom. And where that intersects politically, we can have that debate and we can have it in house, but we got to have it. Because
Mhm.
if you don't have it, one, it's bad for the country, and two, it's bad for the church. And those
Mhm.
are two things that we want to make sure we keep running in tip-top shape at all times. If you
Yeah.
don't, if you believe that, so that's my soapbox. That's my 2 cents. That's my smack on there.
Yeah. So let me give maybe a practical example of how that could look. Um, So, like I said, I'm a staff pastor in our church. I've reached out to another person who's on staff. This person and I, I'm assuming surface level that we disagree on a lot of things politically. Although the more I talk with this person, the more I'm like, I don't know if we disagree as much as what it seems like, though we come from very different backgrounds. But I talked to this person. I was like, you know what? I feel like our young people, because I'm a young adult pastor, I was like, what I'm hearing from them is like they would like to, uh, be able to have conversations about these more politically charged things that they feel like the church isn't really talking about. I says, what if you and I, we could do it, a recording, just you and I having a conversation about your view on this and my view on this. We won't set it up like a debate. We're not going to set it up like, well, which one is the more Christian way to view this? Let's just approach it as, we're both Christians. We both care about, what God cares about, but we have different views on this. And these are the different views at play. And just demonstrating, how those sort of conversations can look like within a church. And in that way, be welcoming, like, you know what? If you agree with this person, like, you're just as welcome as if you agree with me. And we don't agree on this. And you know what? That's okay. Like, just sort of showing, that our focus of unity is something else beyond whatever the hot button issue is. So maybe that's an idea that gives you some idea of maybe something to do. If you're in a position where you can do that, I would encourage it. I hope it does work out. We're still sort of in the planning phase, myself and this other person. We both want to do it. We'll just see, how it develops. But yeah, and also Jordan and I have talked about doing that, so we'll see how that happens. If you want us to do that, leave a comment down below, or reach out to us. Let us know if you'd like to hear us have a conversation that's about a more specific issue where we both disagree. We could both share our own views to sort of see how that plays out.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a thought. But did you have anything else to add, Jordan, before we wrap it up?
No, thanks for sticking with us through this, guys. I know it's kind of been a weird one. I know it's kind of been a weird week.
Yeah,
It might even be a weird weekend.
yeah.
The way rate things are going. That's not to say we should be discouraged. It just means that we've got to hold on tight like we always do, and it's going to be okay. And remember, we serve the King of Kings, but also stay active, be in your communities, balance it out, do the right thing. That's all I got to say.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Like Jordan said, and be sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and comment if you have any ideas. How did you think about what we said? Did you agree? Did you disagree? Let us know in the comments, and we will see you next time.